Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, November 11th, 2024. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thank you for joining us. Today is Veterans Day. President Biden marked the occasion at Arlington National Cemetery. He called honoring and protecting those who serve a, quote, sacred obligation. He also reflected on his late son's deployment to Iraq and talked about the PACT Act, the bipartisan bill he signed that expanded health care benefits for veterans exposed to toxic burn pits. We have 70 days until Inauguration Day, and President-elect Trump has officially named more members of his administration. New York Representative Elise Stefanik to be UN ambassador, former acting Immigration and Customs Enforcement Director Thomas Homan to serve as border czar, and former New York Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin to head the EPA. Also, according to multiple reports, Stephen Miller will return to the White House, this time as Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. Of course, he was the architect of the president-elect's immigration plan in his first term. And Florida Republican Rick Scott says he is the right person to lead the Senate's new Republican majority. Over the weekend, Senator Scott and his two competitors, John Cornyn of Texas and John Thune of South Dakota, all pledged to quickly push through Donald Trump's appointees after the president-elect demanded on social media that they do so. We'll talk to Politico congressional reporter Anthony Adragna about the state of the race to replace Mitch McConnell. Early this morning, the President and First Lady Jill Biden hosted veterans, their families, and other members of the military community at a White House event. They were joined there by Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, VA Secretary Dennis McDonough, and Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines. Following that event, the group traveled across the Potomac River to Arlington National Cemetery. Here's part of what the President said there.
I've said it many times before. I got in trouble for saying it when I was a young senator. I said, we have many obligations, but only one truly sacred obligation. Sacred. To prepare those we send into harm's way and to care for them and their families when they return home and when they don't. It's an obligation, not based on party or politics, but on a promise that unites us all. Today, as we strive on to finish the work of our moment, to bind the nation's wounds once again, we commit and recommit to this sacred vow. This is the last time I will stand here at Arlington as Commander-in-Chief. It's been the greatest honor of my life to lead you, to serve you, to care for you, to defend you, just as you defended us. Generation after generation after generation.
During his speech, the president pulled from his jacket a card that he says lists the number of U.S. troops who were killed or wounded in Afghanistan and Iraq. He has talked about carrying that card with him before. He also spoke about his visits to historic military sites, including a stop in Hanoi, Vietnam, where he honored his friend, the late Senator John McCain, and he reflected on his son Beau's service in Iraq.
Like many of you, our son Beau Biden deployed to Iraq for a year with the Delaware National Guard. I still remember the day he asked me to pin his bars on him. He stood ramrod straight. How proud Jill and I and our entire family felt. Like so many of you, we also remember how hard it was when he was deployed. Empty seats at the dinner table. Missed holidays and birthdays, prayers of hope and worry, repeated every morning and every night. Just as we ask everything of our veterans, we ask everything of their families. The English poet John Milton wrote, and I quote, "They also serve who only stand and wait, as so many of you have." So for all the military families, to all those with a loved one still missing or unaccounted for, to all Americans grieving the loss of a loved one who wore the uniform, Jill and I want you to know we see you, we thank you, and we'll never stop working to meet our sacred obligation to you and your families. Jill and I, Doug and Kamala, our entire administration, are proud of our work over the past 4 years. Together we passed more than 30 bipartisan laws to support our veterans and their families, caregivers and survivors. We brought veterans' homelessness down to a record low. We delivered more benefits to more veterans than any ever before in VA history. We've invested record resources to reduce the scourge of veteran suicide. We took action to protect veterans from scams because no veteran should be defrauded by those they defended. All these actions are vital, but I'm particularly proud of finally passing the PACT Act. This is the most significant law in our history, our nation's history, to help millions of veterans who are exposed to toxins like Agent Orange and burn pits during their military service. Pits the size of football fields that incinerated the wastes of war, tires, chemicals, batteries, jet fuel, and so much more. Pits that left too many veterans with headaches, numbness, dizziness, asthma, and cancer. The PACT Act has already helped over 1 million veterans and their families get the benefits they deserve. They deserve those benefits.
Vice President Kamala Harris and Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff were also at Arlington today. It was the first time the two appeared with the president and First Lady since the election. And Axios reported today that the four, quote, wore solemn expressions on their faces as they paid their respects at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And, quote, they placed their hands over their hearts as the national anthem played before the wreath laying and again afterwards as taps sounded. And as we look ahead to a new president and a new Congress, just what are the top challenges for veterans? We talked to retired Lieutenant Colonel Jim Wally, the CEO of Mission Roll Call.
Sure. Well, veterans tell us in their polling that access to their benefits, quality health care is important. They're very concerned about homelessness. As you know, those numbers continue to go up. And then I think the third one is around medical compensation, right? So, and you've heard a lot of your call-in folks this morning go through their woes and challenges of getting the compensation after they served. And so that's still a major issue for veterans.
When the 119th Congress sits in January, what should be their top priority when it comes to veterans issues?
Well, first of all, we need to take a look at how do we make sure that veterans make the transition to civilian life better. We call it service to service. That's the initiative that we have within Mission Roll Call. We think it's very important that veterans make the transition to employment after their service. And that's a difficult task for many of them right now. The transition assistance program that all the services have falls short. The fact is that veterans are underemployed. 65% of veterans tell us they're underemployed. And why is that? Well, they're humble by nature, right? They're not going to brag about what they did and how many people they led and the equipment they were responsible for. So it's difficult sometimes for them to make that transition. So we'd like to see a national effort underway to make sure that we take transitioning veterans, use those skills, use those qualities that they gain from being in the military to help organizations. Like to see the Business Roundtable involved, Chamber of Commerce. We have a lot of veterans, about 200,000 every year that get out of the military. There's no reason why they can't walk into a job the next day, either continuing to serve their country as police officers, firemen, elected officials, any number of things. I think the second thing that we'd like to see is that we need to make sure that veterans are getting the health care where and when and how they need it. You've heard your callers today. Many of them are struggling getting the health care that they need because they have to go to brick and mortar locations. And sometimes that's far away. The line is very long. There's a bureaucracy involved with that. There's some efficiencies that could be enjoyed in the VA if they would manage that a little bit better. So you hear a lot of frustrated people out there on your calls. I think the third thing that the Congress needs to really think about, and this would seem odd because it's not a veteran issue, but it is a veteran issue, is that 24% of active duty right now have financial insecurity issues. This is not a statistic that we came up with, right? through polling. This is a Department of Defense statistic. So 24% of active duty have food insecurity issues, which is really financial insecurity issues, because the only reason you're not getting the food you need is because you don't have the resources to do so. And that seems abhorrent to us as a veteran community, that you have many junior enlisted and senior enlisted having challenges taking care of their families. It should be no surprise that we're struggling in recruitment and retention when that's the case. And the reason it affects veterans is if you join the military and you're part of that 24% that have food insecurity issues, how do we reasonably expect after 4 or 5 years to you get yourself out of that and then go into the civilian world? And of course, that causes challenges when they get out, which affects the VA. So the DOD and the VA need to work closely on this, and elected officials need to address the issue. We live in a dangerous world. We need a military that can take care of their own.
Retired Lieutenant Colonel Jim Wally, the CEO of Mission Roll Call. They are a veterans advocacy group. You can see the whole conversation along with today's events at Arlington National Cemetery on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and at cspan.org. More now on the faces of the incoming Trump administration. Tom Homan says he is honored to be named the border czar. Earlier today, he talked about the job on Fox News.
I know exactly what I'm doing. And look, this is the second time I get out of retirement for this president, and because it matters. And look, I was a Border Patrol agent. I wore that uniform, and I'm proud that I wore that uniform. So, and I was an ICE agent. I was the first ICE director that actually came up through the ranks. So the 20,000 men and women that worked for me, I didn't ask them to do anything. I did do myself. I was one of them. So look, I know the border, and I know there's a lot of great patriots. Look, I shut my phone off Friday night because I couldn't handle the phone calls, the texts, and emails from thousands of ICE agents and Border Patrol agents excited about the rumor I'm coming back. But more importantly, that thousands of retired agents, retired Border Patrol agents, retired military that want to come in and volunteer to help this president secure the border and do the deportation operation. So I've been off the grid for 3 days just because I couldn't handle all the phone calls, and plus all the death threats rolling in. My family's not at home right now because that's starting. But that's something we're going to deal with. They're not going to bully me away. They're not going to shut me up. They're not going to make me go away. This is the biggest national security vulnerability this nation has seen since 9/11. We have to fix it.
And it's one of the reasons Kamala Harris lost and Donald Trump won. So Tom, you just mentioned deportations. I know during the last Trump administration, when you were there, they did have the large-scale worksite, essentially raids, where they would go into a place and there would be hundreds of people who were in the country illegally. I know on 60 Minutes a couple of weeks ago, you said that those would continue under Donald Trump in the next administration. What do you have planned? Well, I know you don't want to give away the whole game book, but you do have deportations, mass workplace stuff planned, any other kind of category of deportations of interest?
Look, as the president said on stage many times, which I agree with 100%, it's going to be the same it was during the first administration, which is just a hell of a lot more of them because 10 million people have entered this country illegally under the Biden administration, or they actually let into this country, even though it's violation of federal law, what they've been doing, the abuse of the parole authority. But look, I've been clear, President Trump's been clear. Public safety threats and national security threats will be the priority because they have to be. They pose the most danger to this country. So we're going to prioritize those groups, those who always have final orders, those that had due process at great taxpayer expense, and the federal judge says you must go home, and they didn't. They became a fugitive. So, and as far as worksite operations have to happen. Here's why, Steve. Where do we find most victims of sex trafficking and forced labor trafficking? At work sites. And the Biden administration shut down work sites. On one point, they say we care about sex trafficking and human trafficking. Then they shut down worksite enforcement, which is one of the main areas we find the victims of this. I want to add one more thing, another priority. This administration has lost over 300,000 children that were smuggled in this country by criminal cartels they can't find. That's another priority. We need to save these children because some of these children are in forced labor, some of these children are in sex trafficking, some of these children are living a life of hell every day. And we need to save these children and get them back with their families.
A little bit about Tom Homan. As you heard, he is a former Border Patrol agent, former police officer. He was hired to head ICE's deportation branch in the Obama administration. and then was named acting director of the agency when Trump took over in 2017. He retired in 2018. He has spent the last 6 years as a paid contributor to Fox News. He was also one of the authors of the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025. Lee Zeldin, the president-elect's nominee to head the Environmental Protection Agency, served 4 terms in Congress representing a portion of Long Island. He then lost the New York governor's race in 2022. The New York Post noted his prior political work included working to shield Long Island from potentially harmful dredge waste. They also wrote, quote, he's likely to be greeted with less horror by Democrats than some other potential nominees for the post. And the Associated Press writing today about the president-elect's choice for UN Ambassador Elise Stefanik, calling the New York representative, quote, a loyal ally with little foreign policy experience to represent the U.S. at the international organization. Of course, Representative Stefanik will have to resign her seat in Congress. She was just reelected to her 5th term. She is also House Republican Conference Chair. And according to The Hill, the candidates to replace her include Representatives Lisa McClain of Michigan, Aaron Houchin of Indiana, and Kat Cammack of Florida. Representative Stefanik will also need Senate approval for her new job, and her possible departure could play a role in Republicans' quest to retain their House majority. As of this afternoon, according to the Associated Press, Republicans hold 214 seats, Democrats 204, and 17 races are still undecided. One thing we do know, who will lead the Congressional Progressive Caucus? They are one of the more prominent Democratic groups. Here's the chair, Pramila Jayapal of Washington State.
We are still awaiting the makeup of the House, but obviously it's a very slim path to the majority. And I think we are going to do our work to help rebuild and to come back from this loss and recalibrate. But to help ground us in our power, to remind us that we had many victories as well, to showcase the bright lights, the new warriors for justice that are joining us. This is a wonderful day to introduce to you those very people. The new progressive members that are here today, and a couple that weren't able to make it because their races are still waiting to be called, or because in one case somebody is still doing the work that she was hired to do. These are members-elect who ran on progressive, populist economic ideas that spoke directly to the working class and to poor people and rejected corporate money. They are evidence that progressive power, despite everything that we are dealing with, is still growing. 33 years ago, the CPC was founded with just 5 original founding members. And today we stand nearly 100 members strong, and our caucus has never been more diverse and dynamic than it is today. We are so proud of our members. Our members hail from districts in every region of the country, urban and rural, red states and blue states, low income and middle class. And in this freshman class alone, and I'm going to stop for cheers for each one of these because they're remarkable, we have our first trans member of Congress. We have an engineer from an immigrant community in the San Fernando Valley. We have the first Iranian-American Democrat in Congress. We have the youngest member ever elected to the House from New Jersey. And we have a number of trailblazing public servants who you will hear from. These new members have given people across the country hope for the progressive movement as an effective check on a Trump presidency and a Republican potential trifecta, and a source of inspiration with their own lived experiences, their personal accomplishments, their collective accomplishments towards a better future.
You can see the entire event at cspan.org and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Congress is back tomorrow for the first time since the election for legislative business and votes. They have a busy month ahead. On Wednesday, House and Senate Republicans will both hold leadership elections for the next Congress. House Republicans will elect their nominee for Speaker, and Senate Republicans will pick their next leader. Members are also facing a government funding deadline, and they must pass additional federal spending by December 20th to avert a shutdown. Now, as for the floor schedules, the House will gavel in tomorrow at noon Eastern. On the agenda this week, legislation to increase transparency of mail-in ballots by requiring ballot envelopes to have tracking barcodes. Also, a bill requiring the Education Department to make the federal education loan forms known as FAFSA available to students each year by October 1st. Over in the Senate, they'll start their day at 3 p.m. Eastern. They will vote later in the week on several of President Biden's judicial nominations for U.S. district and tax courts. You can watch live coverage of the House on C-SPAN, the Senate always on C-SPAN too, and get all of our congressional coverage on C-SPAN now and at cspan.org. You're listening to Washington Today.
Is it possible to use one word to remember or describe the 2024 presidential campaign? If so, that one word might start with the letter S. This year on the campaign trail, the S word seemed to be everywhere. What were candidates talking about that required foul language? How did the crowds react to all the cussing and cursing? And did the candidates express any regrets about using vulgarity and profanity? Find out in the latest episode of C-SPAN's Podcast Weekly. It's our first ever podcast that might be rated R because it's brought to you by the letter S. Find C-SPAN's The Weekly wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today. Campaign 2024 news now. Democratic Representative Ruben Gallego now leads Republican Kari Lake by more than 66,000 votes in their Senate race in Arizona. That race has yet to be called. Meanwhile, Pennsylvania Democratic Senator Bob Casey is not conceding his race, despite several news organizations calling it for Republican Dave McCormick. Campaign spokesperson Maddie McDaniel said in a statement, quote, "As state officials have made clear, counties across Pennsylvania are still processing ballots and need time to tabulate remaining votes. There are more than 100,000 ballots left to be counted, including tens of thousands of provisional ballots in counties favorable to Senator Casey. And just yesterday, officials reaffirmed that tens of thousands of mail ballots remain. Pennsylvanians deserve to have their voices heard, and the process of tabulating votes will continue in the coming days." Now, no matter how those races turn out, Republicans will take control of the Senate in January, and as we mentioned, they'll be voting on new leaders on Wednesday. The current frontrunners, John Cornyn of Texas, John Thune of South Dakota, and Rick Scott of Florida. Senator Scott's talked about his chances this morning on Fox News.
I'm very optimistic. I believe I'm going to win. Thune and Cornyn are friends. Here's what I bring to the table. I clearly believe in the Trump agenda, number one. I'm a business guy that had success doing exactly what we need to do in the Senate. We need to have a plan. We need to work a plan. We need to have a team. We need to measure ourselves. If we want to get all the nominees done, we've got to figure out a plan to get it done. If we want to get a balanced budget, we got to start today to get a balanced budget. If we want to get the border secure, if we want to get whatever policies we have to get through Congress, we have to have a plan, just like what you do in business. I ran a company with 285,000 employees. We had a written plan for everything to get it done. My colleagues have told me they want change. They want to be treated as equal. They want to be part of a team. They want to have an agenda. They want to have a great relationship with the House. They know I have a great relationship with Speaker Mike Johnson. So I'm very optimistic that I'm going to win because I'm representing Trump's agenda and what my colleagues want.
So you have Elon Musk in your corner. You have Senator Marco Rubio in your corner, but it's a secret ballot. Do you have Trump in your corner?
Well, I hope he weighs in. I welcome his support, but that's up to him. Tommy Tuberville supported me. Bill Haggerty supported me. The Ron Johnson supported me. There's other people that clearly would like what I'm talking about, but it's a secret ballot, so we'll see if they come out publicly and support me. But I'm going to work hard. I believe I'm going to win because I represent exactly what the Trump team wants and what Trump wants and what the American public wants. We have a great Republican Party across the country. We need to have a Republican Party representing us as leader in the Senate.
Senator Rick Scott, Republican from Florida, on Fox News Channel this morning. And joining us now with the latest on the Senate Republican leadership election is Anthony Adragna, congressional reporter with Politico. Thanks for being with us. 3 announced Republican Senate candidates for Majority Leader in the next Congress. We had Rick Scott of Florida, John Cornyn of Texas, John Thune of South Dakota. Is there a favorite at this point?
I think the conventional wisdom, and thank you for having me, is that Senator Thune has a slight advantage in this contest. This is going to be a secret ballot on Wednesday, so Republicans don't have to reveal who they're voting for. Senator Thune right now is obviously second in command of the Senate Republican Conference. And, people seem to think that he has a modest but a leg up going into the race.
So over the weekend, a number of high-profile people outside of the Senate who support Donald Trump suddenly threw their support behind Rick Scott. What was that about?
Yeah, absolutely. The conservative online influence sphere has certainly come out in full force behind Senator Scott's bid. Folks like your Tucker Carlsons, Charlie Kirks, Glenn Becks, Elon Musks of the world. So certainly a concerted effort here to view somebody as who they see as an unquestioned foot soldier of the president-elect. They're all coming out for him. They're hoping to sway senators, intimidate them, threaten primaries against those that don't support Senator Scott's bid. Unquestioned as to whether or not any of those efforts are going to actually sway anybody. Senators tend to be quite protective of their turf and their ability to make their own decisions. They don't like these overt pressure campaigns against them.
President-elect Donald Trump has not endorsed a candidate, though.
That's correct, at least so far. I think all eyes are waiting to see if President Trump does weigh into this contest. Certainly that would scramble the dynamics. He certainly has a lot of close allies right now that have weighed in for Senator Scott, but he himself has not. And again, I think that's what we'll be watching in the next couple of days is if he does weigh in, how does he choose to do that, and could that change the calculus going into this vote?
You wrote an article at Politico.com about what President-elect Trump said yesterday, writing yesterday on Truth Social, not about a candidate, but about a policy. What was that?
Yeah, so President Trump has floated this idea of the next leader needs to be willing to pursue what are called or allow recess vacancies. This would allow the president, when Congress is out of session, to fill posts throughout the federal government on a temporary basis. The Senate could then go back in and confirm them later. This has sort of fallen out of favor in the last decade or so. There was a Supreme Court decision that invalidated some recess appointments made by President Obama back in 2014. But this is something that Trump has talked about before. He's certainly interested in doing it. I expect we're going to see some resistance from, again, the Senate creating a new precedent there, ceding some of the power, the checks and balances. But we'll see what happens there. Certainly all three contenders for the position have not closed the door on this idea of recess appointments.
We're talking with Politico reporter Anthony Adragna. Do you know how the Senate Republicans are going to handle Pennsylvania and Arizona, with Dave McCormick having claimed victory, but Senator Bob Casey, the Democratic incumbent, has not conceded in Arizona? There's no announced winner yet.
Yeah, I think that's good. Well, I think we're going to have to wait and see if there's a call in Arizona in the next couple days. It certainly seems like that's a possibility for Congressman Gallego. With regards to Pennsylvania, certainly this has turned into quite a dust-up. Majority Leader Schumer has so far declined to offer Senator-elect McCormick an invitation to orientation. That's something that is pretty traditional, at least on the House side, even when the races are not called, to extend the invite to members of both parties who may eventually take the seat. There have been a number of Republican senators that have announced their plans to escort Senator-elect McCormick to orientation, regardless of whether or not Schumer has extended an invitation. So there's a decent chance we could have a bit of a confrontation here. Although, we'll see what happens with the race in the next couple of days. Certainly, Senator Casey trails by about 40,000 votes with not that many more to count. So he faces quite an uphill battle in terms of that contest.
So there is a chance that Senator-elect McCormick, as he has called himself at this point, could actually cast a vote for the leader.
I think there's probably better than a 50% chance that he does. I think certainly his intention is to show up for orientation. I imagine if he shows up, he will be given a vote.
We mentioned the three announced candidates, John Thune, John Cornyn, Rick Scott. What are the differences between them?
I think the biggest differences are honestly stylistic. Obviously, both Cornyn and Thune have been in Washington for quite a while. Senator Cornyn has quite a lot of experience in the political arena. He ran the NRSC at one point. Senator Thune has, in recent years, chaired a committee. He's been second in command of the Republican conference. Senator Scott, by contrast, is a more recent addition to Washington. He narrowly won his first race in 2018, unseating an incumbent, and was just reelected by a wide margin. But he's sort of, throughout his time in Washington, has been less of a deal maker, less willing to wheel and deal than the other two. And I think that's one of the knocks against him. He's been a staunch proponent of the former presidents, the president-elects. Both Senator Cornyn and Senator Thune have in the past made comments that have been somewhat critical of Trump. They've since walked those back and made amends with the president-elect. But those are all sort of a variety of different factors here. But I think substance and stylistic are going to be some of the factors that are going to weigh into for the Republican senators as they're weighing how they're going to decide.
And finally, the process. You mentioned the votes Wednesday, secret ballot, majority wins, and is it multiple rounds, lowest candidate out? How does that work?
Yeah, my understanding is that it's the majority of the conference. So we're expecting there to be 53 Republican senator votes. So the first to get a majority of that would win. Assuming that nobody gets there on the first ballot, the lowest vote receiver would then be dropped and you would revote. So I think at maximum we're looking at 2 ballots here. And the real question would be what happens to the voters who go for that third candidate, whoever receives the fewest votes, and how would they reallocate those votes on the second ballot? I think that's, very much a speculative parlor game here in Washington, but we'll have to wait and see. But it could be a really interesting vote on Wednesday, that's for sure.
Anthony Adragna is a congressional reporter with Politico. Find his articles at Politico.com and on X at Anthony Adragna. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And don't forget, you can get the very latest results at cspan.org/results. We have final electoral college breakdown and which states, you can see which states each candidate carried. There are interactive maps to explore the outcomes of the Senate, House, and governor's races and keep track of the final balance of power in Congress. And of course, you can see all the acceptance and concession speeches. Again, cspan.org/results. According to the Associated Press, roughly half of young Latino men voted for Kamala Harris in the 2024 election. That's down from the nearly 60% President Biden carried in 2020. And today, Florida Representative Carlos Jimenez, a Republican, talked about that swing and the impact President-elect Trump had with Latino voters with Washington Post Live.
In a sense, no. When people ask me what I expected, and my gut told me it was going to be a repeat of 1980. But again, polls were saying that it was really close, et cetera. And so anything that came out would not have surprised me. But yeah, I thought it was very similar to 1980. Yeah, I thought it was similar to 1980. You had a president that was highly unpopular. We had high inflation, we had high mortgage rates. Our standing in the world was suffering. You had wars going on in the Middle East and in Ukraine. You had a border that was out of control. That's a little bit different than what was happening in 1980. But then you had, the alternative. And then in 1980 was Ronald Reagan, and right now, in this year, it was Donald Trump. And I could see a lot of the similarities with that. And so it didn't surprise me that he won in the fashion that he won.
Do you think that he is coming into the presidency with a mandate? And, if Republicans do have a trifecta in Washington, what are congressional Republicans going to prioritize?
Well, number one, we're going to prioritize securing the border. We need to do that. We're also going to prioritize getting start to deregulation. There's over $3 trillion of regulations that are hampering American ingenuity and our American prosperity. We need to get a handle on that. We need to get on board with energy. President Trump has said he wants to unleash American potential when it comes to energy production. I wholeheartedly agree. The best thing that we can do right now is start to substitute Russian oil, Iranian oil, Venezuelan oil with American oil and natural gas. Not only will that hamper our enemies around the world, but also help our allies and also help America. And so, so those are in a nutshell, some of the things we need to do, obviously, we also want to start to reduce the cost of government. And I know that he's going to be appointing, I guess, Elon Musk to look at government and start to slash some of these bureaucracies. And I can tell you, look, when I was the mayor of Miami-Dade County, the first thing I did when I won back in 2011, I had to reduce the government by about 10%. Because we were going through an economic crisis. And I can tell you we did that. And you know what? We didn't skip a beat.
You can see all of that event at cspan.org. And as we mentioned, that's also where you can see all of today's Veterans Day events at Arlington National Cemetery. Well, there was another Veterans Day observation today just outside of Washington in Church Creek, Maryland. That's where Maryland Governor Wes Moore posthumously promoted Harriet Tubman to the rank of Brigadier General in the Maryland Army National Guard. Harriet Tubman was the first African-American woman to serve in the U.S. military in combat. She provided intelligence to the Union Army about the location, supply lines, and missions of Confederate troops. She was also the first woman to lead an armed military assault. That assault freed over 750 slaves. After the war, she was awarded a Civil War pension for her service. Today's event happened at the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad State Park and Visitor Center.
You know, this is an important and a powerful day. And you think about the meaning of Veterans Day. Veterans Day is a day that this is a holiday that is earned. Right? This is not a holiday that is just given. This is a holiday that is a celebration of those who chose to raise their hand. It's a celebration of those who chose to put on the uniform. It's a celebration of those who chose to leave their families. It's a celebration of those who chose to put and risk everything for us, for the hope of us, for the aspirations of this country. It's a celebration of those who are willing to put their lives on the line because they believe in our greater good. And I could not think of a more appropriate day. A day to lift up one of the greatest Marylanders we have ever seen, one of the greatest patriots this country has ever seen, than to have a day where we are going to honor and lift up and commission Harriet Tubman to be a general. I could not think of a more appropriate day to do that than today of Veterans Day.
You can find out more about Harriet Tubman's life and service, more about the Civil War, and more about our veterans at cspan.org/history and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. That's also where you can find this program as a podcast. It's also on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And for more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day, get our daily email word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum involving you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy from Washington, D.C. to across the country. Coming up Tuesday morning, we'll talk about the week ahead in Congress, including leadership elections, with reporters Emily Brooks of The Hill and Stephen Newcomb of Axios. Also, Philip Wegman, White House reporter for Real Clear Politics, on the role of the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025 in the incoming Trump administration. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join the conversation live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app, or online at cspan.org.